Atlanta's architectural story begins not with grand plans, but with geography. In the 1830s, the city that would become Atlanta emerged at the terminus of the Western and Atlantic Railroad, a location chosen for its elevation and access to transportation routes rather than any pre-existing settlement. This practical origin shaped everything that followed. The city was built for movement and commerce, and that purpose would define its architecture for generations to come. In its earliest decades, Atlanta developed as a modest railroad town with simple wooden structures typical of the American frontier. These buildings reflected the uncertainty of a young settlement practical. Quickly constructed and temporary in appearance, if not always in fact. But the arrival of the railroad brought rapid growth. By the Civil War era, Atlanta had become a significant commercial center. The war itself would reshape the city's architectural trajectory in unexpected ways. When Atlanta burned in 1864, much of the early built environment was destroyed. But this devastation created an opportunity for rebuilding. The Reconstruction era that followed brought new architectural ambitions to Atlanta. The city that rose from the ashes adopted styles that reflected post-war prosperity and a desire to demonstrate progress. Victorian-era commercial buildings, built in brick and stone, began to define downtown districts. These structures featured ornate detailing, tall windows for commercial display, and masonry construction that conveyed permanence and respectability. Cast-iron storefronts and decorative cornices became common features. This period established patterns of downtown development that would persist for decades. As the 19th century progressed into the 20th, Atlanta's economy diversified beyond its railroad origins. The city became a regional hub for manufacturing, distribution, and finance. This economic expansion demanded new types of buildings. Industrial warehouses with steel frames and large open interiors rose in rail-adjacent districts. Banks and office buildings grew taller, adopting the commercial styles emerging in American cities. The Beaux-Arts movement influenced institutional architecture. Seen in civic buildings designed with classical proportions and formal symmetry, these buildings projected stability and civic pride during a period of genuine economic growth. The early 20th century also witnessed the expansion of residential neighborhoods. Streetcar lines, which proliferated rapidly after 1900, enabled middle-class residents to live farther from downtown while remaining connected to employment and commerce. This technological shift fundamentally altered Atlanta's urban form. Bungalows and modest two-story homes with front porches became the dominant. Residential type in neighborhoods developed along streetcar routes. These houses, typically built of brick or wood with pitched roofs, reflected the tastes and building practices of their era. Neighborhoods like Virginia Highland, Inman Park, and Druid Hills developed according to early urban planning principles. With tree-lined streets and varied lot sizes that created a sense of place distinct from downtown commercial zones, the Great Depression slowed Atlanta's growth but did not halt it entirely. The 1930s saw fewer new buildings, but those that were constructed reflected the streamlined aesthetic of Art Deco design, which appeared in theaters, department stores, and smaller commercial structures. This style, with its geometric patterns and smooth surfaces, contrasted with the ornate Victorian buildings of previous generations and signaled changing tastes in modern design. World War II and the post-war period transformed Atlanta's architecture fundamentally. The city's role as a military and industrial center brought investment and population growth. After the war, federal policies, including the Federal Housing Administration's mortgage programs and the Interstate Highway system, encouraged suburban development on an unprecedented scale. Atlanta expanded outward rapidly, with new residential subdivisions featuring ranch-style homes and curvilinear street patterns, designed for automobile access rather than pedestrian movement. The mid-century modernist movement influenced institutional and commercial architecture during the 1950s and 1960s. Streamlined glass and steel office buildings replaced older masonry structures in the downtown core. These buildings reflected a faith in technological progress and efficient design. Simultaneously, urban renewal projects removed historic districts and older neighborhoods to make way for parking lots, office parks, and new commercial developments. This period marked a significant departure from the mixed-use, walkable urban patterns that had developed in earlier eras. The latter decades of the 20th century brought continued change. Preservation movements emerged in response to the loss of historic districts, and architectural historians began documenting Atlanta's built heritage more systematically. Neighborhoods that had been overlooked during decades of outward expansion were recognized for their historical and architectural significance. The adaptive reuse of older commercial buildings for residential and cultural purposes created new relationships between the city's past and present built environments. Atlanta's architectural history reflects patterns common to many American cities, yet with particular characteristics shaped by its specific geography, economic development, and historical circumstances. The city's architecture evolved from simple railroad-era structures through Victorian prosperity, modernist optimism, and suburban expansion. Each phase left layers of buildings that exist together in the contemporary cityscape. The downtown core preserves examples from nearly every era. Historic neighborhoods retain residential architecture from the early 20th century. Suburban districts extend far beyond the city's original boundaries. This accumulated built environment tells the story of how a practical railroad terminus became a major metropolitan region. Today, Atlanta's architecture encompasses all these historical periods simultaneously. The city's identity is shaped by this palimpsest of styles and eras. The question of which buildings and districts to preserve, which to adapt, and which to replace remains active. The architectural past of Atlanta continues to influence present decisions about growth, development, and urban form. In this way, the city's architectural history is not merely something observed in old buildings, but an active force shaping how the city develops and how people experience it. The layers of architecture that accumulated over time create the physical foundation upon which contemporary Atlanta exists.